What if the greatest architectural achievement in ancient history was built by people who had never constructed anything in their lives? Exodus 25:8 records God's startling command to Moses, "Let them make me a sanctuary, that I may dwell among them." Most people assume the tabernacle was a simple tent, a modest structure for a wandering people. But the biblical account reveals something far more extraordinary. A precision-engineered sacred complex that required skills these former slaves shouldn't have possessed. In this investigation, we will uncover 3 revolutionary truths. First, we will discover why this construction was considered impossible by every measure of ancient engineering. Then, we will trace how an enslaved generation gained the knowledge to attempt it. Finally, we will explore what this reveals about divine preparation and human potential. And once we understand this first layer, the real story begins. Picture the scene at Mount Sinai. Moses descends from his encounter with the living God carrying instructions that would have seemed like madness to any rational observer. The Israelites stand in the desert, 2 million strong, with nothing but the clothes on their backs and the plunder they carried from Egypt. They possess no cities, no workshops, no infrastructure of any kind. Yet Moses announces they will build a dwelling place for the Creator of the universe. The absurdity of this commission cannot be overstated. Scripture tells us the tabernacle required thousands of talents of gold, silver, and bronze. It demanded fabrics woven with such skill that each thread carried symbolic meaning. It needed woodwork so precise that panels had to fit together perfectly after being transported across shifting desert sands. Every measurement had to be exact. Every material had to meet divine specifications. One error could mean the difference between God's acceptance and his rejection. Consider what this meant for a people whose entire existence had been defined by making bricks. For generations, Israelite hands had known only the repetitive, mindless labor of slavery. They mixed mud and straw. They formed rectangular blocks. They laid them in endless rows under the whips of Egyptian taskmasters. Nothing in their experience prepared them for what God was asking. They had no architects among them, no metallurgists, no master weavers or jewelers. They were builders of the most basic kind, and now they faced a project that would challenge the greatest craftsman of any civilization. Yet here stands Moses, holding detailed plans for a structure more complex than anything most of them had ever seen. The instructions cover everything from the thickness of gold plating to the exact shade of dyed fabrics. God specifies the type of wood, the weight of metal, the design of embroidered cherubim. He describes furniture that must be crafted from solid gold, curtains that must hang at precise heights, and a courtyard that must maintain exact dimensions no matter where they pitch camp. This is not a tent. This is a portable temple, a mobile palace for the King of the universe. The technical challenges alone would have overwhelmed experienced builders. How do you maintain structural integrity in a building designed to be assembled and disassembled hundreds of times? How do you create walls that stand firm against desert winds yet can be carried on poles? How do you work with gold in an environment where temperatures swing from scorching heat to freezing cold? How do you achieve the precision required for sacred service when your tools are primitive and your workspace is sand? But the deeper question cuts even further. Why would God ask for something so elaborate? Ancient Near Eastern peoples built temples from stone, permanent structures meant to last centuries. The Egyptian temples the Israelites had seen were massive monuments carved from granite, their walls thick enough to withstand millennia. Yet God requests something temporary, something mobile, something that seems to contradict the very concept of an eternal dwelling place. What is he teaching through this paradox? Some scholars suggest the tabernacle represented a revolutionary theological statement. Unlike the pagan gods who were thought to reside in specific locations, the God of Israel would travel with his people. He would not be confined to one city or one building. Wherever they went, his presence would accompany them. The tabernacle was not just a place of worship, but a declaration that God himself had chosen to camp among his people, to share their journey through the wilderness. The Hebrew word for tabernacle, mishkan, literally means dwelling place. God was moving into the neighborhood. Yet this raises another troubling question. Does the infinite God need a physical structure? Can the one who created the heavens and the earth be contained in a tent made by human hands? Solomon would later acknowledge this impossibility when he dedicated the temple, saying the highest heaven cannot contain God, much less a house built by mortals. So why does God command Moses to build the tabernacle at all? What purpose does it serve if God cannot be limited to its walls? The answer may lie not in what the tabernacle does for God, but in what it does for humanity. People need tangible expressions of invisible realities. We need places where heaven touches earth, moments when the sacred becomes visible. The tabernacle would become the focal point of Israel's identity, the place where they met with God, received His guidance, and found atonement for their sins. It was a gift to them, a concession to their need for physical encounter with the divine. God was accommodating human limitation while teaching profound spiritual truth. And now, Moses must convince a traumatized, recently freed slave population to attempt this impossible task. He must inspire them to give their wealth, their time, and their skills to create something none of them fully understand. He must organize a massive construction project in a hostile environment with limited resources. He must maintain quality control when the stakes are eternal. One mistake in the Holy of Holies could result in death. One deviation from the divine pattern could mean God's presence never fills the structure. The pressure is unimaginable. Yet the story is just beginning. What happens next will reveal something unexpected about how God prepares His people for impossible assignments. Chapter 2, From Slaves to Master Craftsmen, Scripture introduces us to two men who will become central to the tabernacle's construction, and their names appear suddenly, without warning or explanation. Exodus 31:2 records God's words to Moses, "See, I have called by name Bezalel the son of Uri, son of Hur, of the tribe of Judah." Then he adds Oholiab son of Ahisamach, of the tribe of Dan, as Bezalel's assistant. But who were these men? Where did they come from? And more importantly, how did slaves in Egypt acquire the skills to lead such a sophisticated project? The text provides a stunning answer. God says He has filled Bezalel with the Spirit of God, with skill, with intelligence, with knowledge, and with all craftsmanship. He can work in gold, silver, and bronze. He can cut stones for setting. He can carve wood. He can execute every kind of craft. This is not merely natural talent. This is divine empowerment. God Himself is downloading expertise directly into human minds. The Spirit who hovered over creation at the beginning of time now hovers over these craftsmen, teaching their hands to do what their experience never could. But here is where the story becomes controversial. Some scholars argue that the Israelites must have received training during their time in Egypt, that their slavery exposed them to Egyptian techniques and technologies. After all, Egypt was the most advanced civilization of the ancient world. Egyptian metallurgy was unmatched. Their textile work was legendary. Their ability to work with precious stones and create intricate jewelry was renowned throughout the known world. If the Israelites built Egyptian cities and monuments, surely they observed and absorbed these skills. Yet this theory faces a significant problem. Slaves do not receive master training. They perform grunt labor under strict supervision. Egyptian craft guilds closely guarded their secrets, passing knowledge only to approved apprentices within their own families and social classes. The Israelites were foreigners, oppressed minorities who threatened Egyptian society simply by their numbers. What master craftsman would teach advanced techniques to people considered dangerous and expendable? What guild would accept Hebrew slaves as legitimate students of their art? Still, the Bible hints at an unexpected reality. The Israelites did not arrive in Egypt as slaves. They came as honored guests under Joseph's influence. Genesis tells us they settled in Goshen, the best land of Egypt, and prospered there for generations. During those years of favor, before a pharaoh arose who did not know Joseph, the Israelites lived among Egyptians, participated in Egyptian commerce, and likely learned Egyptian trades. The knowledge was already there, buried in collective memory, waiting to be awakened. Consider the implications. God does not usually bypass natural processes when supernatural empowerment will do. He does not typically give people skills they could never have acquired through normal means. Instead, he takes what is already present, what has been learned or experienced or observed, and he amplifies it. He brings forgotten knowledge to the surface. He connects dots that seemed unrelated. He gives sudden insight into techniques partially understood. The Spirit's filling does not replace human preparation but completes it. This explains why God specifically names Bezalel and Oholiab. They were not random choices. Something in their background, their training, or their experience made them suitable for divine enhancement. Perhaps they had worked in Egyptian workshops before the oppression intensified. Perhaps they came from families who preserved craft knowledge across generations. Perhaps they were the rare Israelites who maintained connections with Egyptian artisans even during slavery. We do not know the details, but we know God chose them for a reason. Yet God's empowerment goes beyond these two leaders. Exodus 35 records that God also placed skill in the hearts of all who were skilled, that they might do every sort of task. This suggests a widespread distribution of ability throughout the Israelite community. Many people discovered talents they did not know they possessed. Women who had woven simple cloth suddenly understood complex patterns. Men who had worked with basic tools suddenly grasped advanced metallurgy. The Spirit was moving across the camp, awakening dormant potential in thousands of individuals. But this raises a troubling question. If God could simply download skills into people's minds, why did he allow them to suffer in Egypt for 400 years? Why did he permit generations to waste away making bricks when he could have preserved their knowledge and dignity? Why did the preparation for the tabernacle require such a painful detour through slavery? What kind of God uses oppression as a training ground for sacred service? The answer may lie in understanding God's longer purposes. The Israelites did not go to Egypt just to escape famine. They went to become a nation. They arrived as an extended family of 70 people. They left as a multitude of over 2 million. That transformation required time, and it required circumstances that kept them together as a distinct people. In Canaan, they would have assimilated, married into the local population, and lost their identity. In Egypt, their foreignness was constantly reinforced. They remained separate, distinct, united by their suffering and their hope for deliverance. Moreover, their time in Egypt taught them what they were not. They learned they were not Egyptians, not defined by the world's greatest civilization. They discovered their identity was tied to something older, something deeper, something that transcended culture and geography. They were the children of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. They were the people of God's promise. Their slavery became the darkness against which the light of God's redemption would shine most brilliantly. Without Egypt, there is no Exodus. Without bondage, there is no appreciation for freedom. Without the crucible, there is no refining of character. So when God fills Bezalel and Oholiab with his Spirit, he is not starting from scratch. He is completing a process that began generations earlier. He is harvesting fruit from seeds planted during Egypt's prosperity. He is transforming suffering into skill, oppression into opportunity, trauma into triumph. The hands that made bricks will now craft the dwelling place of God. The minds that endured slavery will now comprehend divine blueprints. The people who are nothing will build something eternal. And this transformation happens not through their effort alone, but through divine partnership. God provides the skill, but they must provide the willingness. God gives the knowledge, but they must apply it. God offers the pattern, but they must execute it. This is the biblical model of calling. Divine empowerment meeting human obedience. Supernatural gifting channeled through natural hands. What emerges from this partnership will astonish everyone who witnesses it. But first, Moses must understand exactly what he is being asked to build. Chapter 3. The Celestial Blueprint. Moses spends 40 days and 40 nights on Mount Sinai, and during that time something extraordinary occurs. Exodus 25,009 records God's instructions, exactly as I show you concerning the pattern of the tabernacle and of all its furniture, so you shall make it. The Hebrew word for pattern is tabnit, which means a structure, a model, or a representation. God is showing Moses something, giving him a visual reference that he must replicate precisely in the physical world. But what exactly did Moses see? The book of Hebrews provides a stunning clue. Hebrews 8:5 describes the earthly tabernacle as a copy and shadow of the heavenly things. It quotes God's warning to Moses, "See that you make everything according to the pattern that was shown you on the mountain." This suggests Moses did not receive mere blueprints or architectural drawings. He was granted a vision of the heavenly reality itself. He saw the true tabernacle, the eternal dwelling place of God, and he was commanded to create an earthly version that reflected its design. Think about what this means. Moses encounters a dimensional intersection, a moment when the veil between heaven and earth becomes thin enough for human eyes to perceive what normally remains invisible. He sees the architecture of eternity. He observes how worship functions in God's presence. He witnesses the furniture, the colors, the layout, the materials that exist in the heavenly realm. And somehow, he must translate this vision into instructions that human craftsmen can follow using earthly materials. This is not as simple as remembering what you saw and describing it to others. The heavenly tabernacle exists in a different order of reality. It is not bound by the physical laws that govern earthly structures. It does not require posts to hold up curtains or bases to prevent walls from toppling. It exists in perfection, unmarred by human error or material limitation. How does Moses communicate this to people who have only ever known the physical world? How does he explain colors that earth cannot produce or dimensions that transcend space? Some rabbinical traditions suggest Moses struggled with this very problem. The Midrash contains stories of Moses returning from the mountain confused and overwhelmed by what he had seen. In these accounts, God has to show him multiple times, using various methods to help him understand. One tradition claims God showed Moses a tabernacle of fire, each component blazing with distinct colors so Moses could distinguish between different elements. Another suggests God acted out the construction process, demonstrating how each piece should be made and assembled. These stories, while not canonical scripture, point to a real challenge. How do you transfer a vision from one person's mind to an entire community? Moses cannot simply say, "Make it like I saw it." He must provide exact measurements, specific materials, detailed assembly instructions. He must break down the heavenly vision into earthly components without losing the essential meaning. Every cubit, every color, every connection point matters because they all combine to create something that represents divine reality. The dimensions God provides are remarkably precise. The tabernacle measures 30 cubits long by 10 cubits wide by 10 cubits high. The courtyard extends 100 cubits by 50 cubits. Each board is 10 cubits tall, 1.5 cubits wide, with tenons for fitting into bases. The Ark of the Covenant is 2.5 cubits long, 1.5 cubits wide, and 1.5 cubits high. These are not round numbers chosen for convenience. They form a complex system of proportions that creates harmony and balance throughout the structure. Scholars have noted that these dimensions reveal sophisticated mathematical relationships. The ratios between different elements repeat throughout the design, creating visual and symbolic unity. Some argue these proportions reflect patterns found in nature, the golden ratio that appears in seashells and flower petals. Others suggest they mirror the dimensions of other ancient sacred spaces, showing that God speaks in a language his people can understand while pointing them toward transcendent truth. The tabernacle is both utterly unique and strangely familiar, but the celestial blueprint includes more than measurements. God specifies materials with equal precision. He wants gold for this item, silver for that one, bronze for another. He calls for blue, purple, and scarlet yarn for fine linen and goat hair. He names acacia wood as the only acceptable timber. He describes the oil for the lamps, the spices for the incense, the stones for the priestly garments. Each material carries symbolic weight. Each choice communicates something about God's character and his relationship with his people. Gold represents divinity, purity, kingship. Silver symbolizes redemption, as it was the metal used for the census tax that bought back each Israelite life. Bronze speaks of judgment, as it covers the altar where sin offerings are burned. Blue recalls the sky, the realm of heaven and divine authority. Purple indicates royalty, the color of kings and those who rule with power. Scarlet points to blood, sacrifice, the cost of atonement. Fine linen shows righteousness, purity, the character of those who serve God. Every material is a sermon, every color a theological statement. This means the tabernacle is not merely functional, it is pedagogical. It teaches through its very existence. When an Israelite approaches the tabernacle, they encounter theology made visible. The bronze altar teaches them about sin and its consequences. The bronze laver shows them the need for cleansing. The golden lampstand reveals that God is light. The table of showbread demonstrates that God provides sustenance. The altar of incense illustrates the power of prayer rising to heaven. The veil declares that access to God is limited, that holiness separates humanity from divinity, and the ark in the Holy of Holies, covered by the mercy seat, proclaims that God meets with his people over the place of atonement. Yet even with all these details, Moses faces an impossible task. He must convey not just information but inspiration. He must help people see what he saw, feel what he felt, understand what he understood. He must take a transcendent vision and ground it in practical reality without losing its power to transform hearts. He must turn heaven's architecture into desert construction, and he must do it knowing that any deviation from the divine pattern could result in disaster. The blueprint is clear, but the execution will test everything they have. What Moses does not yet realize is that the materials themselves will present the next impossible challenge. Chapter 4: The Mystery of Materials in a Barren Desert. When Moses presents the list of required materials to the Israelites, a logical question should arise: where will we find these things? They are standing in the Sinai wilderness, one of the most barren regions on earth. There are no mines nearby producing precious metals. No forests offer unlimited timber. No workshops manufacture fine fabrics or process rare dyes. Yet God's list read like a luxury shopping catalogue. Gold, silver, bronze, blue and purple and scarlet yarn, fine linen, goat hair, ram skins dyed red, goat skins, acacia wood, oil for the lamps, spices for anointing oil and fragrant incense, onyx stones and stones for setting. How can a nomadic people in the middle of nowhere possibly provide these items? The answer requires us to look back at the Exodus narrative. Exodus 12:35-36 records a remarkable event that occurred just before the Israelites left Egypt. Moses instructs the people to ask their Egyptian neighbors for articles of silver and gold, and for clothing. The text says the Lord gives the people favor in the sight of the Egyptians, so that they give them what they ask. The Israelites plunder Egypt, leaving with vast wealth that seems almost too convenient for the story that follows. Some skeptics point to this as evidence that the Exodus account is fabricated. Why would Egyptians give their wealth to departing slaves? It makes no economic sense, but the biblical text provides context. The 10 plagues have devastated Egypt. The firstborn of every Egyptian household lie dead. Pharaoh's own son is gone. The nation is traumatized, desperate to see the Israelites leave before more judgment falls. In this moment of panic and grief, the Egyptians will pay any price to speed the departure of these people whose God has proven so terrible in his power. The plunder is not theft but compensation, back wages for generations of unpaid labor. Yet even this explanation raises questions. If the Israelites receive gold and silver and clothing from Egypt, where do they get the specialized materials? Where does the blue and purple and scarlet yarn come from? Where do they find acacia wood in the desert? Where do they obtain the precious stones for the priestly breastplate? The text never explicitly tells us, leaving room for speculation and interpretation. Some scholars suggest the Israelites bring more from Egypt than the text directly states. Egypt was famous for its textile industry, producing fabrics that were exported throughout the ancient world. Egyptian linen was considered the finest available, and Egyptian dyes were highly prized. If the Israelites plunder Egypt thoroughly, they would have access to stores of these materials. Similarly, Egypt imported precious stones from various regions for use in jewelry and royal adornments. The departing Israelites could have taken finished jewelry, gemstones, and other valuables that would later be repurposed for the tabernacle. But the acacia wood presents a unique puzzle. Acacia trees do grow in the Sinai Peninsula, but they are not abundant. They tend to cluster in wadis, dry riverbeds where occasional water allows vegetation to survive. To build the tabernacle, the Israelites need a substantial quantity of this wood. Every board, every post, every piece of furniture, except the solid gold items, requires acacia. The trees must be harvested, transported to the camp, and processed into usable lumber. This is not a simple task for a people who are supposed to be constantly moving. One possibility is that the Israelites spend considerable time in certain locations, allowing them to gather resources. The biblical chronology shows they camp at the base of Mount Sinai for almost a year. During this period, they could send expeditions into the surrounding wilderness to locate and harvest acacia trees. Teams of men could cut the trees, strip the bark, season the wood, and transport it back to camp. It would be labor-intensive work, but not impossible for a community of 2 million people with time to spare. Another consideration is that God may have provided materials supernaturally. The same God who sends manna every morning and brings water from rocks could certainly supply wood or other resources as needed. Some traditions suggest that acacia groves appeared near the camp, or that the wood the Israelites gathered never depleted no matter how much they took. These accounts are not found in Scripture, but they reflect an ancient understanding that God's provision for the tabernacle extended beyond the plunder from Egypt. What we know for certain is that Moses calls for voluntary contributions. Exodus 35 records that everyone whose heart stirred them is invited to bring an offering for the tabernacle's construction. The people respond with such generosity that Moses eventually has to tell them to stop bringing materials because they have more than enough. This detail is stunning. A people who recently experienced slavery, who are surviving on daily manna in a desert, give so abundantly that the project leaders have excess materials. They value God's presence among them more than personal wealth. This reveals something profound about the Israelite community at this moment in their history. They are not the grumbling, faithless people who will later refuse to enter the promised land. They are not yet the generation who will wander for 40 years because of unbelief. Right now, at Mount Sinai, they are inspired, devoted, eager to participate in something bigger than themselves. The recent deliverance from Egypt burns fresh in their memory. The miracles at the Red Sea remain vivid. They have heard God's voice from the mountain. They want to respond to His invitation with everything they have. The materials themselves become an act of worship. When a woman donates her silver jewelry to be melted down for the tabernacle, she is saying that God's presence matters more than personal adornment. When a man brings gold that could have bought security for his family, he is declaring that proximity to God is worth any cost. When families contribute fabrics and skins and precious stones, they are investing in a collective future centered on divine worship. The tabernacle will not belong to Moses or to the priests or to any individual. It will belong to all of them, because all of them have given to make it possible. Yet this raises a challenging question for modern readers. Would we respond with the same generosity? If God asked us to give sacrificially for something that would benefit the entire community but cost us personally, would we hold back or give freely? The Israelites teach us that true worship requires skin in the game, actual sacrifice that demonstrates the sincerity of our devotion. Faith without cost is just intellectual agreement. Faith that empties your pockets and gives your treasures to God's purposes is faith that transforms hearts. But having the materials is only the beginning. Now comes the truly impossible part, working with them in a way that meets divine standards. Chapter 5. Fire and gold melts at 1064 degrees Celsius. This is a simple scientific fact, But in the ancient world, achieving such temperatures posed extraordinary challenges. The tabernacle requires massive amounts of gold work. The Ark of the Covenant must be overlaid with pure gold inside and out. The mercy seat that covers it must be hammered from a single piece of solid gold. The table of showbread requires gold overlay. The lampstands must be crafted from a single talent of pure gold. Approximately 34 kilograms of metal hammered and shaped into an intricate design with cups shaped like almond blossoms. How do desert craftsmen accomplish this without modern furnaces, temperature gauges, or controlled environments? The answer lies in techniques the ancient world developed through centuries of trial and error. The Egyptians were masters of metallurgy, and they achieved high temperatures through remarkably simple means. They built clay furnaces fueled by charcoal, particularly charcoal from acacia wood, which burns at very high temperatures. But charcoal alone cannot reach the melting point of gold. The secret ingredient is forced air. By using bellows made from animal skins, workers could blast air into the furnace, increasing the oxygen supply and driving temperatures high enough to melt even the most resistant metals. Archaeological evidence shows that ancient bellows were sophisticated devices. Workers would stand on either side of a furnace, rhythmically pumping large leather bags to force air through clay pipes into the fire. The coordination required was intense. If the air supply faltered, the temperature dropped and the metal would not melt properly. Too much air in the fire could consume the fuel too quickly or scatter the coals. The process demanded constant attention, physical endurance, and years of experience to master. Yet the Israelites must learn these techniques in the desert, adapting Egyptian knowledge to wilderness conditions. But working with gold presents challenges beyond simply melting it. Gold is soft, which makes it easy to shape, but also means it can be damaged easily. When gold is heated to melting point, it becomes a liquid that must be poured into molds or formed while still hot. The craftsman must work quickly before the metal cools and hardens. If they make a mistake, they must reheat the gold and start over, wasting precious fuel and time. Every item must be formed correctly because there is no room for error in sacred service. The lampstand presents perhaps the greatest challenge. God commands that it be made from a single talent of pure gold, hammered into shape rather than cast in pieces and assembled. This means the craftsman must heat the gold until it is soft enough to work, then hammer it into the elaborate design God specifies. The lampstand includes a central shaft with 6 branches extending from it, 3 on each side. Each branch must have 3 cups shaped like almond blossoms with buds and flowers. The central shaft has 4 such cups. The base and decorative elements add additional complexity. All of this must be created through hammerwork, requiring extraordinary skill and patience. Imagine Bezalel approaching this task. He begins with a lump of gold weighing as much as a small child. He must heat it carefully, not so much that it melts completely, but enough that it becomes malleable. Then he begins hammering, shaping the gold gradually into the required form. Each blow of the hammer must be precise. Too hard and the gold could crack or deform incorrectly. Too soft and the metal will not move into the desired shape. He must work steadily, reheating the gold as it cools, hammering again, checking the proportions against the vision Moses has shared. Days blur into weeks. The work is exhausting, demanding total concentration. One major mistake and he must melt the gold down and start over. Yet this is more than artistic expression. This is worship through craftsmanship. Bezalel knows that the lampstand will stand in the holy place, that its light will illuminate the sacred space, that priests will tend it every day as part of their service to God. Every hammer blow is a prayer. Every adjustment to the design is an offering. The physical labor transforms into spiritual practice. His hands move, but God's Spirit guides them. The gold takes shape, and heaven's pattern appears in earthly form. The overlay work requires different techniques but equal precision. To cover the ark with gold, craftsmen must hammer gold into thin sheets, then carefully affix these sheets to the wooden structure. They cannot use nails, which would split the wood and violate the design. Instead, They likely use a combination of precise fitting and possibly natural adhesives to secure the gold. The result must appear seamless, as if the ark is solid gold rather than gold-covered wood. Any gaps, any visible seams, any imperfection would diminish the ark's representation of divine perfection. Some scholars debate whether the Israelites actually possessed the skill to accomplish this work. They point out that many details of ancient metallurgy remain mysterious even to modern researchers. They note that experiments attempting to recreate ancient techniques often fail or produce inferior results. They question whether a recently freed slave population could really produce items of such quality in desert conditions, but these objections assume that human ability alone determines what is possible. The biblical account repeatedly emphasizes that God fills the workers with His Spirit, that divine empowerment supplements human skill. Bezalel and his team are not working alone. They are collaborating with the Creator Himself. This collaboration explains how the impossible becomes possible. When Bezalel faces a problem he cannot solve, inspiration comes. When the team encounters a technical challenge beyond their training, a solution appears. When the work threatens to overwhelm them, strength is provided. This is not magic. This is God's normal way of working through people who commit their abilities to His purposes. He does not bypass their hands, but He guides them. He does not do the work for them, but He ensures they can accomplish what He has called them to do. Yet the gold work is only one category of metallurgy required for the tabernacle. Silver and bronze present their own challenges, and the quantities required are staggering. But the gold captures something essential about the entire project. It represents the most precious material being offered for the most sacred purpose. It symbolizes the Israelites taking the plunder of Egypt, the wealth of the world's greatest empire, and repurposing it for the worship of the one true God. The gold that once adorned Egyptian temples and palaces now decorates the dwelling place of the God who defeated Egypt's gods. The transformation is complete. But if gold represents divinity, the wood represents humanity, and its story is equally compelling. Chapter 6. The Acacia Wood Revelation. Acacia trees do not inspire poetry. They are gnarled, thorny survivors, clinging to existence in some of Earth's harshest environments. In the Sinai Desert, they grow in scattered clusters, their roots reaching deep to find water, their thick bark protecting against the scorching sun. They are not tall or straight like the cedars of Lebanon. They are not beautiful like the oaks that would later symbolize strength in Israelite poetry. They are simply resilient, stubbornly alive where most plants would die. Yet God chooses this wood, and only this wood, for the tabernacle's structure. Why? The Hebrew name for acacia is shittim, which appears throughout the tabernacle instructions. Exodus repeatedly specifies that the boards, the poles, the framework must all be made from shittim wood. Scholars have identified this as Acacia tortilis or Acacia radiana, species that still grow in the Sinai region today. The wood is dense, hard, and resistant to insect damage. It does not rot easily, even in changing conditions. These practical qualities make it ideal for a structure that must be assembled and disassembled repeatedly over 40 years of wilderness wandering. But the symbolism runs deeper than utility. Acacia represents humanity in its fallen state. The thorns speak of the curse that came through sin, the declaration in Genesis that thorns and thistles would mark the ground because of human rebellion. The twisted growth reflects how sin distorts and damages human nature. Yet, this same wood, when chosen by God and covered with gold, becomes the framework for His dwelling place. Humanity, broken and marked by the fall, can still be used for divine purposes when God transforms it. The acacia, covered in gold, is a picture of redemption, of ordinary people who bear the image of God despite their flaws. But before the wood can be used, it must be harvested and prepared. This task falls to teams of men who venture into the wilderness to locate acacia groves. The work is dangerous. Acacia trees have sharp thorns that can cause painful wounds. The desert environment is unforgiving with venomous snakes, scorpions, and the constant threat of dehydration. The men must identify mature trees of the right size, cut them down with the tools available, remove the branches and bark, and transport the timber back to camp. Each board for the tabernacle measures 10 cubits long, approximately 4.5 meters or 15 feet. Finding trees tall and straight enough to produce such boards requires patience and careful searching. Once the timber reaches camp, the real work begins. The wood must be cut to exact specifications. Each board must be 1.5 cubits wide and 10 cubits tall. 2 tenons, projecting pieces that will fit into the silver bases, must be carved into the bottom of each board. The measurements must be precise because the boards will fit together to form the tabernacle's walls. Any variance will create gaps or prevent proper assembly. The craftsmen use tools that seem primitive by modern standards, saws and planes and chisels, yet they achieve remarkable accuracy. The construction method God specifies is ingenious. Rather than building a solid wall, the tabernacle uses a frame system. Vertical boards stand upright, held in place by silver bases at the bottom, and connected by horizontal bars that run through golden rings attached to the boards. This creates a structure that is both stable and portable. The boards can be taken apart and reassembled without losing their alignment. The framework can flex slightly in desert winds without collapsing. It is an engineering solution that anticipates modern prefabricated building techniques by thousands of years. But who designs this system? Moses receives the pattern from God, but the practical implementation requires engineering insight. Someone must figure out how to carve the tenons so they fit the bases securely. Someone must determine the proper spacing for the crossbars. Someone must test the structure to ensure it will stand firm when assembled. The text credits Bezalel and Oholiab with wisdom for all manner of workmanship, and this surely includes the engineering knowledge needed to turn divine vision into physical reality. They are not just artists, but architects, not just craftsmen, but engineers. The number of boards required is substantial. The tabernacle needs 20 boards for the south side, 20 for the north, and 6 for the west, plus 2 additional boards for the corners. That is 48 major structural components, each requiring individual attention and precision work. Then there are the crossbars, 5 for each side, some of which run the entire length of the tabernacle. The rings to hold the crossbars must be attached to each board. The poles for carrying the tabernacle's furniture must be made. The frame for the outer court requires its own posts and bases. The volume of woodwork is staggering, and every piece must meet divine specifications. Yet the acacia wood does not remain bare. God commands that the boards be overlaid with gold, that the crossbars be covered with gold, that the poles be plated with gold. This transforms utilitarian construction into sacred art. The gold covering elevates the humble desert wood, making it suitable for God's dwelling. But the gold does not change what the wood is. Underneath the shining surface, the acacia remains acacia, thorny desert survivor, chosen and transformed. This is the gospel in architectural form, humanity redeemed and made glorious, not by ceasing to be human, but by being covered with divine glory. The poles deserve special mention. The ark, the table of showbread, the altar of incense, the altar of burnt offering, all require poles for carrying them. God is emphatic that certain items must never be carried by hand or placed on carts. The poles ensure that sacred objects maintain separation, that human hands do not touch what is holy. The poles are made of acacia wood overlaid with gold, permanently placed through rings on the sides of each item. They represent the mobility of God's presence, the reality that Israel's God travels with his people rather than being confined to one location. These poles will carry the sacred furniture through deserts and rivers, into battle, and through daily camp life for 40 years. They must be strong enough to last, light enough to be manageable, and perfectly balanced to prevent damage to what they carry. Think about what this means for those who carry the poles. The Kohites, one of the Levite clans, receive this responsibility. They do not see what they carry because it is covered with protective cloths. They simply lift the poles and walk, trusting that what rests between them is sacred beyond their comprehension. Their obedience makes worship possible. Their strength allows the tabernacle to move. Their faithfulness ensures that God's presence accompanies the nation. They are the hidden servants whose work is absolutely essential but rarely celebrated. And once we understand this first layer, the real story begins. The framework is impressive, but it must stand firm against forces that would topple any ordinary structure. Chapter 7. Engineering the unmovable in motion. A building that must be assembled and disassembled repeatedly faces engineering challenges that permanent structures never encounter. Every joint is a potential point of failure. Every connection must be secure enough to provide stability, yet simple enough to be undone when the time comes to move. The tabernacle must stand firm against desert windstorms, must maintain its exact dimensions no matter how many times it is taken apart, and must protect the sacred objects within from any damage. How do you create something simultaneously stable and mobile? God's solution involves an element that seems excessive until you understand its purpose. Each board of the tabernacle rests in a base made of silver. These bases, called sockets in some translations, are not decorative. Each one weighs a talent of silver, approximately 34 kilograms or 75 pounds. With 96 boards requiring bases, plus additional bases for posts and pillars, the total amount of silver is staggering. Exodus 3827 records that 100 talents of silver were used to cast the bases for the sanctuary and for the veil. 100 talents for the 100 bases, 1 talent for each base. This is over 3,400 kilograms of silver, roughly 7,500 pounds, dedicated solely to the foundation system. Why such massive bases? The answer lies in physics. The tabernacle's boards are relatively light, especially compared to the solid walls of a permanent structure. Without significant weight at the bottom, the entire structure would be top-heavy and vulnerable to tipping in strong winds. The silver bases provide ballast, keeping the center of gravity low and the structure stable. Moreover, the weight of the bases creates pressure that helps lock the tenons of the boards firmly in place. The boards cannot easily shift or slip when they are supporting and being held by such massive foundations. But there is more to the story. The silver for these bases comes from a specific source. Exodus 30 describes a census of all Israelite men, 20 years old and above. Each man must pay a half shekel of silver as atonement money. The text is clear that the rich must not give more and the poor must not give less. Every man's life is valued equally before God. The total collected from 603,550 men is 100 talents of silver plus 1,735 shekels. The 100 talents are used for the bases, while the extra silver goes toward the hooks and bands for the pillars of the court. This means every man in Israel has a share in the foundation of the tabernacle. Their redemption price literally supports the structure where God will meet with them. The symbolism is profound. Redemption is the foundation of relationship with God. Every Israelite who enters the tabernacle walks on a foundation built from the ransom price of the community. They stand on grace, on the collective acknowledgement that their lives belong to God and have been bought back at a cost. The silver represents lives redeemed, people purchased, a nation standing not on their own merit, but on God's gracious acceptance of their offering. From the very ground up, the tabernacle teaches theology, yet stability requires more than heavy bases. The boards must be locked together horizontally to prevent the walls from bowing outward or collapsing inward. God's design includes 5 crossbars for each side of the tabernacle, running through gold rings attached to the boards. 4 of these crossbars are visible, probably running along the outside of the boards. But the 5th is special. Exodus 26:28 says the middle bar is to run from end to end, halfway up the frames. Some scholars believe this bar runs through the boards themselves, inside the structure, creating an internal spine that binds everything together. This would require incredibly precise drilling or carving to create a channel through each board, but it would provide unmatched structural integrity. Imagine the engineering challenge. If the middle bar runs through the boards, every channel must align perfectly. If even one board's hole is slightly off, the bar will not slide through and the wall cannot be assembled. This demands accuracy that seems impossible without modern tools. Yet ancient craftsmen regularly accomplished feats that baffle contemporary observers. They built structures like the pyramids, carved massive obelisks, and created joints so precise that a knife blade cannot fit between stones. The skills existed, the knowledge was available, and God ensures that Bezalel and his team have access to both. But corner construction presents another puzzle. The tabernacle's west wall consists of 6 boards plus 2 corner boards. Exodus 26:24 describes these corner boards as being coupled together at the bottom and coupled together at the top. The exact mechanism is debated, but the purpose is clear. The corners must be reinforced because they bear the greatest structural stress. Any weakness at the corners would compromise the entire building. Some reconstructions suggest the corner boards are angled, creating a diagonal brace. Others propose an overlapping system where the corner boards connect both the west and north-south walls. Whatever the exact method, the result must be strong enough to maintain the structure's integrity through countless assemblies. But the tabernacle does not stand alone. It sits within a courtyard enclosed by linen curtains hung from posts. This outer court measures 100 cubits by 50 cubits, a significant area that provides space for the altar of burnt offering and the bronze laver. The posts that support the courtyard curtains rest in bronze bases and are topped with silver capitals. They are connected by silver rods from which the curtains hang. This creates a defined sacred space, a boundary between the holy and the common, the set apart and the ordinary. The courtyard itself becomes a teaching tool, showing that approaching God requires passing through designated boundaries, entering prepared spaces, acknowledging the separation between the divine and the human. The curtains add another layer of complexity. The tabernacle's interior includes multiple layers of curtains, each with specific materials and purposes. The innermost layer consists of 10 curtains of fine twisted linen with blue, purple, and scarlet yarn, with cherubim woven into them. These curtains are the ceiling of the tabernacle, what priests see when they look up inside the holy place. The curtains are sewn together in 2 sets of 5. Then the sets are joined with gold clasps, creating one unified covering. The dimensions are exact. Each curtain measures 28 cubits by 4 cubits, producing a total covering that fits the tabernacle precisely. Over this beautiful inner layer go 3 additional coverings. First, 11 curtains of goat hair, each 30 cubits by 4 cubits, provide a tent-like covering that extends beyond the linen curtains. This layer is joined with bronze clasps. Then a covering of ram skins dyed red protects against weather. Finally, a covering of goat skins formed the outermost layer, shielding everything beneath from sun, wind, and sand. Each layer has a purpose, both practical and symbolic. The layers represent increasing levels of protection, multiple barriers between the holy objects inside and the harsh environment outside. They also teach that access to God involves passing through multiple stages, each bringing worshippers closer to the divine presence at the center. Assembly and disassembly become routine tasks that must be performed with care every time the camp moves. The Levites have specific responsibilities. The Gershonites transport the curtains and coverings. The Kohathites carry the sacred furniture after the priests have covered it. The Merarites handle the frames, posts, bases, and structural elements. Each clan knows their role. Every item has its place. The system works because it has been designed for mobility from the beginning. What seems impossible, maintaining a complex sacred structure while constantly traveling, becomes simply the normal rhythm of Israel's life with God. Yet the engineering marvel of the framework would mean nothing without the artistry that makes it beautiful. And that beauty comes through the hands of women whose work transforms thread into theology. Chapter 8. The Women Who Wove Heaven. Exodus 35:25-26 introduces us to a group who rarely receive attention in discussions of the tabernacle. All the women who were skilled with their hands spun with their hands, and brought what they had spun, in blue and purple and scarlet yarns and fine linen. All the women whose hearts stirred them to use their skills spun the goat hair. These verses reveal something unexpected. The tabernacle's beauty comes significantly through women's work. The fabrics that form the innermost layer, the curtains that divide the holy place from the Holy of Holies, the priestly garments, all require textile skills that women possess and offer willingly. But we must not romanticize their contribution by making it seem simple. Ancient textile production was extraordinarily labor-intensive. Every thread began as raw material, either plant fiber for linen or animal hair for wool. Creating yarn required multiple steps. First, the raw material had to be cleaned and prepared. Linen came from the flax plant, which had to be soaked, beaten, and combed to separate the fibers. Wool had to be sheared, washed, and carded. Only then could the spinning begin. Spinning converts loose fibers into thread through a process of twisting and drawing out. Ancient spinners used simple drop spindles, weighted sticks that twist as they hang, pulling and spinning the fibers into yarn. The work requires constant attention, steady hands, and years of practice to produce thread of consistent thickness. A spinner might produce only a few hundred meters of thread in a day of continuous work. The quantities required for the tabernacle would have demanded countless hours from many women working together over extended periods. But spinning is only the first step. The spun yarn must then be dyed, and here we encounter another challenge. God specifies particular colors: blue, purple, and scarlet. These are not common dyes that can be made from local plants. These are expensive, prestigious colors that require rare materials. Blue came from a specific sea snail, the Murex trunculus, found along Mediterranean coasts. Extracting the dye required thousands of snails for even small quantities of coloring. Purple, the most expensive dye in the ancient world, came from a related snail species. Scarlet came from the crushed bodies of the Kermes insect, which feeds on specific oak trees. These dyes were so valuable that in the Roman Empire, wearing purple became restricted to royalty. Yet the Israelites used them extensively in the tabernacle. How did they obtain these materials? The most likely answer returns us to the plunder of Egypt. Egyptian storehouses would have contained dyed fabrics and possibly raw dyes brought through trade networks. The Israelites may have taken finished fabrics in these colors, carefully unraveled them to reclaim the dyed yarn, then rewoven it into the patterns God requires. Alternatively, they may have taken Egyptian dyes and applied them to their own spun yarn. Either way, the women are not working with common materials, but with the precious luxuries of empire, repurposed for the worship of the one true God. Once the yarn is prepared and dyed, the weaving begins. Ancient looms were simple but effective devices that held vertical threads, called the warp, while horizontal threads, the weft, were passed through to create fabric. But the tabernacle curtains are not simple cloth. God commands that cherubim be woven into them. This means the women must use a technique called tapestry weaving, or perhaps elaborate embroidery, to create images within the fabric itself. Different colored threads must be carefully managed to produce the desired patterns. A work demands artistic vision as well as technical skill. The innermost curtains, which form the tabernacle's ceiling, feature cherubim throughout their length. These angelic guardians, which appear at key moments in Scripture from Eden's gate to the throne room of God, are woven into the fabric that priests see overhead. The message is clear. Those who serve in God's presence are watched over by heavenly beings, surrounded by the reality of the spiritual realm, even in the physical space of worship. Every time a priest looks up, he sees reminders that he is not alone, that the invisible world of angels encompasses the visible world of human service. But who are these women who possess such skill? The text says their hearts stirred them to use their skill. This suggests that not every woman participated, only those who felt called to contribute in this way. Some may have learned textile arts during the years in Egypt. Some may have come from families where these skills passed from generation to generation. Some may have discovered talents they did not know they possessed when the need arose and God's Spirit awakened dormant abilities. Regardless of their backgrounds, they chose to use their skills for something greater than personal benefit. Consider what it means for these women to donate their time and skill. Textiles in the ancient world were valuable, often given as gifts, used as currency, and treasured as heirlooms. A woman's ability to produce fine fabric increased her family's wealth and status. By directing their work toward the tabernacle instead of personal gain, these women are making a significant sacrifice. The hours they spend spinning and weaving for God are hours they cannot spend producing textiles to trade or sell. They are choosing community worship over individual advancement, demonstrating that what benefits all Israel matters more than what benefits one household. The goat hair curtains require different skills. Goat hair produces rougher, more durable fabric than linen or wool. The curtains made from it serve as a tent over the tabernacle, a layer that gives it the appearance of a Bedouin-style tent from the outside. These curtains must be large, strong, and weather-resistant. They will take the brunt of sun, wind, and sand. The women who spin and weave this material understand they are creating functional protection, not delicate beauty. Yet even this work is done as worship. Even this contribution matters to the whole. The text also mentions that some women brought mirrors of bronze to be melted down for the bronze laver. Mirrors were personal items, symbols of vanity perhaps, but also valuable possessions that allowed a woman to see herself, to prepare her appearance, to take pride in how she looked. Giving up these mirrors is a profound statement. It says that seeing God matters more than seeing oneself. It declares that the priest's need to wash before serving is more important than personal grooming. It transforms an instrument of self-focus into a tool for holy service. The laver made from women's mirrors will reflect the priests' faces as they cleanse themselves, reminding them that those who approach God must do so with clean hands and pure hearts. Yet, even as we celebrate the women's contributions, we must acknowledge a troubling pattern in Scripture. Their names are rarely recorded. The text tells us about Bezalel and Aholiab, but does not name the women whose spinning and weaving made the tabernacle's beauty possible. This reflects the patriarchal structure of ancient Israelite society, a culture where women's work, though essential, often went unacknowledged in historical records. It is a reminder that much of the kingdom work throughout history has been done by people whose names we do not know, whose faces we cannot recognize, whose stories were never written down. They served faithfully, used their gifts generously, and trusted that God saw what humans overlooked. But their work speaks even when their names are silent. Every thread tells a story of patience and dedication. Chapter 9. Colors that cost more than gold. The dyes that cost more than gold. The dyes that color the tabernacle's fabrics represent wealth on a scale difficult for modern readers to comprehend. In the ancient world, color was not cheap. Most people wore undyed clothing, the natural beige of linen or the brown and gray of wool. Only the wealthy could afford garments dyed in vibrant colors, and even among the rich, certain colors remained out of reach for all but the most powerful. Yet the tabernacle uses the three most expensive dyes known to antiquity: blue, purple, and scarlet. This is not merely aesthetic choice. This is theological statement. Let us begin with blue. The Hebrew word is tekeled, referring to a specific shade of blue derived from the murex snail. Ancient dyers would collect thousands of these sea snails, crack them open, and extract a tiny amount of yellowish mucus from a gland near the creature's head. When exposed to sunlight and air, this mucus undergoes a chemical transformation, turning deep blue. The process is inefficient. It takes roughly 12,000 snails to produce 1.4 grams of dye, barely enough to color the trim of a single garment. Scaling this up to dye the quantities of yarn required for the tabernacle would have demanded millions of snails and extraordinary labor. The color itself carries symbolic weight. Blue represents heaven, the sky, the realm of God. When an Israelite sees the blue in the tabernacle's curtains or on the high priest's robe, they are meant to think of the divine, the transcendent. the heavenly reality that the tabernacle makes tangible. The blue serves as a visual sermon, preaching that this structure connects earth to heaven, that worship here is participation in something cosmic. Later, God will command the Israelites to put blue cords on the tassels of their garments, specifically so they will remember the commandments of the Lord. Blue is memory, reminder, connection to the divine. Purple, or arguman in Hebrew, comes from a related species of murex snail. Though the dye extraction process differs slightly, purple was the most expensive color in the ancient world, worth more than its weight in gold. Roman emperors would later restrict purple to imperial use, making it a capital crime for unauthorized persons to wear it. In the ancient Near East, purple signified royalty, wealth, and supreme power. Kings wore purple. Palaces displayed purple. The tabernacle's use of purple declares that the God of Israel is the ultimate king. Worthy of the most precious colors humanity can produce, it transforms the tent in the desert into a palace fit for the king of the universe. Scarlet, called tola at shani in Hebrew, literally means worm of crimson. This identifies the source, the kermai insect, a small bug that feeds on certain oak trees. Female kermai's insects filled with eggs were collected and dried. When crushed, they produced a brilliant red dye. Like the blue and purple, producing significant quantities required intensive labor. Workers had to locate the right trees, harvest the insects at the right stage of their life cycle, and process them carefully to extract the maximum color. The resulting scarlet was both beautiful and meaningful. Scarlet in scripture often represents blood, sacrifice, and redemption. The crimson threads in the tabernacle point forward to the ultimate sacrifice that will make atonement permanent. They remind worshippers that approaching God requires blood, that sin has a cost, that redemption is never free. Isaiah 1018 will later use this color in a striking promise. Though your sins are like scarlet, they shall be as white as snow. The scarlet in the tabernacle is both problem and solution, both the color of sin and the color of the blood that covers sin. But how do you work with these precious dyes? Ancient dyers guarded their techniques jealously, passing knowledge only to approved apprentices. The processes were complex, involving careful preparation of the fiber, precise mixtures of dye materials and mordants to fix the color, controlled heating, and proper timing. Get any step wrong and the dye will not take properly, or the color will fade quickly, or the fabric will be damaged. The stakes are even higher with the tabernacle because these fabrics will be seen daily by priests, will be assembled and disassembled repeatedly, and will be exposed to harsh desert conditions. The dyes must be permanent, the colors must remain vibrant, and the fabrics must endure. Some scholars question whether the Israelites could really produce such quality in the wilderness. They point out that professional dye works in ancient cities were elaborate operations with dedicated facilities, large vats, controlled fires, and access to water. The desert offers none of these advantages. Yet, we must remember that the Israelites are not starting from scratch. Many of them witnessed or participated in textile production in Egypt. The plunder from Egypt likely included dyed materials or raw dyes. The wisdom God grants to the craftsman includes understanding of these processes. What seems impossible in theory becomes achievable in practice when divine enablement meets human diligence. The fine linen deserves mention here as well. While not as expensive as the dyed yarns, fine linen was itself a luxury product. It came from carefully cultivated flax plants, and producing fine thread required expert processing. Egyptian linen was famous throughout the ancient world for its quality, so fine that some examples surviving in tombs have thread counts comparable to modern high-end fabrics. The tabernacle's linen curtains would have felt smooth, looked brilliant white, and provided a perfect background for the colored embroidery of cherubim. White in ancient symbolism represents purity, holiness, and righteousness. The fine linen speaks of the character required to approach God. It will later be explicitly connected to righteousness in Revelation, where the fine linen represents the righteous deeds of the saints. When priests enter the tabernacle and look up at the linen ceiling with its woven cherubim, they are surrounded by reminders of required holiness, by visual calls to purity in thought and action. The colors do not just decorate, they preach, they teach. They transform physical space into theological education. Yet all of this, the blue and purple and scarlet, the fine linen and the cherubim, exist to draw attention to what the curtains protect and reveal, the furniture of the tabernacle itself. And no piece is more central, more sacred, or more dangerous than the Ark of the Covenant. Chapter 10. The Ark and the Mercy Seat. The Ark of the Covenant is the heart of the tabernacle, the focal point of Israel's worship, the place where God promises to meet with his people. Exodus 25:10-22 provides meticulous instructions for its construction. It must be 2.5 cubits long, 1.5 cubits wide, and 1.5 cubits high, roughly 4 feet by 2.5 feet by 2.5 feet. The box is made of acacia wood, overlaid with pure gold inside and out. A gold molding runs around the top edge. 4 gold rings are cast and attached to the 4 feet, 1 ring at each corner, and through these rings slide poles of acacia wood overlaid with gold. The poles remain permanently in place, ensuring that no one touches the ark directly. But the ark is more than a box. On top sits the mercy seat, called the kaperet in Hebrew, a term related to the word for atonement. The mercy seat is a solid gold cover that fits precisely on top of the ark. It is not a separate piece of furniture, but an integral part of the ark itself, the place where God will manifest his presence. 2 cherubim of hammered gold rise from the mercy seat, 1 at each end, their wings spreading upward and overshadowing the mercy seat, their faces looking down toward it. Between these cherubim, above the mercy seat, God promises to meet with Moses and speak with him. Think about what this means. The creator of the universe chooses to localize his presence at a specific point in space, not throughout the tabernacle, not anywhere in the camp, but specifically above the mercy seat between the cherubim. This is where the infinite intersects with the finite, where the transcendent God makes himself accessible to his people. The ark becomes the throne of God on earth, the place where heaven touches the desert floor. Inside the ark, Moses places 3 items. First, the tablets of the testimony, the stone tablets on which God himself wrote the 10 Commandments. These tablets represent God's covenant with Israel, his law, his expectations for how his people should live. Second, a golden pot of manna, a preserved sample of the bread God provided daily in the wilderness. This represents God's provision, his faithfulness to sustain his people even in impossible circumstances. Third, Aaron's rod that budded, the staff that miraculously produced blossoms and almonds to confirm God's choice of Aaron as high priest. This represents God's authority, his right to choose leaders and demand obedience. These 3 items tell Israel's story. They are people who have received God's law, experienced God's provision, and live under God's appointed leadership. The ark contains their identity. When they look at it, they see who they are and whose they are. They are the covenant people, fed by God, guided by his chosen servants. This is not ancient history. This is living memory placed in a gold-covered box and carried at the center of their camp wherever they go. But the ark is also dangerous. Later events in Israel's history will demonstrate this terrifying reality. When the ark is captured by the Philistines, it brings plagues on their cities until they send it back in desperation. When a man named Uzzah reaches out to steady the ark during transport, he dies instantly. When priests perform their duties incorrectly, God's holiness manifests in lethal ways. The mercy seat is where God's presence dwells, but it is also where his holiness must be approached with utmost care. Once a year, on the Day of Atonement, the high priest enters the Holy of Holies and sprinkles blood on the mercy seat. This blood covers the law inside the ark, symbolically atoning for the nation's violation of God's commands. The priest who performs this duty risks death if he is not properly prepared. The craftsmanship required to build the ark tests Bezalel's skill to its limits. The overlay work must be perfect, with no gaps between the gold sheets. The corners must be precisely fitted. The rings must be cast and attached securely enough to bear the ark's weight during transport, but without compromising the aesthetic unity. The mercy seat presents an even greater challenge. It must be hammered from a single piece of gold, which means starting with a substantial block of gold and shaping it through countless hammer blows. The cherubim must be formed as part of this same piece, not attached separately. Their wings must curve naturally upward. Their faces must angle toward the mercy seat. Their proportions must be balanced and beautiful. Some scholars estimate that the mercy seat alone requires at least 50 kilograms of gold, possibly more depending on the size and thickness. This is an enormous quantity of metal to work into such a detailed form. The hammering must be done when the gold is heated to the right temperature, soft enough to move, but not so hot that it melts. The work would take days or weeks of patient effort, constantly reheating and reshaping, checking proportions, adjusting details. Every blow of the hammer is literally shaping the place where God will dwell. The pressure to achieve perfection must be overwhelming, yet Bezalel persists because he understands what is at stake. This is not merely furniture. This is the throne room of the King of Creation. This is where atonement will be made, where Israel's relationship with God finds its expression, where the nation's survival will be determined year after year. If the ark is not built correctly, if the mercy seat does not meet divine specifications, the consequences could be catastrophic. God's presence might not fill the tabernacle. The covenant could be nullified. Everything Moses and the people have worked toward could fail. When the ark is finally complete, it is placed in the most holy place, the innermost chamber of the tabernacle, separated from the holy place by an embroidered veil. Only the high priest enters this space, and only once a year. The ark sits in darkness, hidden from human eyes, shrouded in mystery, yet its presence sanctifies everything around it. The entire tabernacle is holy because the ark is there. The camp is arranged around it, with the tribes positioned in specific patterns relative to its location. When Israel travels, the ark goes first, carried by priests leading the way. Where the ark is, God is. Where God is, his people follow. But the holy place, where priests serve daily, contains its own furniture, each piece teaching its own lesson about approaching God. Chapter 11. The Table of Presence and the Golden Lampstand. In the holy place, the chamber where priests serve daily, two pieces of furniture stand in quiet testimony to profound theological truths. On one side sits the Table of the Presence, also called the Table of Showbread. On the other stands the Golden Lampstand. These items may not carry the dramatic significance of the ark, but they are essential to the tabernacle's function and meaning. Each one reveals something crucial about God's character and his relationship with his people. The Table of the Presence measures 2 cubits long, 1 cubit wide, and 1.5 cubits high, roughly 3 feet by 1.5 feet by 2.25 feet. Like the ark, it is made of acacia wood, overlaid with pure gold. A gold molding surrounds the top, and 4 gold rings attached to its legs for the carrying poles. But the table's purpose makes it unique. On this table rest 12 loaves of bread, arranged in 2 rows of 6. Every Sabbath, fresh bread replaces the week-old loaves, which the priests then eat. The bread remains on the table continuously, perpetually in God's presence, representing the 12 tribes of Israel. This arrangement makes a stunning statement. God invites his people to his table. The bread symbolizes Israel itself, constantly before God's face, never forgotten, always acknowledged. The Hebrew phrase lekampanim means bread of the face or bread of the presence. It suggests intimacy, the closeness of a meal shared between host and guest, the covenant relationship expressed through food. In ancient Near Eastern culture, eating together created bonds of loyalty and mutual obligation. By maintaining bread continually in his presence, God is declaring that he has entered into table fellowship with Israel. They are his guests, and he is their host. But the symbolism goes deeper. bread represents sustenance, the staff of life, what humans need to survive. By accepting this bread in his house, God acknowledges that he is Israel's provider, the source of their daily existence. The bread on the table is baked with fine flour, made from grain grown in fields, harvested and processed by human hands. It represents the partnership between divine blessing and human labor. God provides the rain and the sunshine that make crops grow, but humans must plant and tend and harvest and grind and bake. The bread is simultaneously God's gift and Israel's offering, a perfect picture of covenant relationship. The table also includes plates, dishes, pitchers, and bowls for pouring drink offerings. These items are all made of pure gold, transforming a simple meal into something magnificent. The priests do not eat casually from this table. They consume the bread reverently, recognizing it as holy, set apart by its time in God's presence. This is not merely food. This is sacrament, physical substance carrying spiritual meaning, common bread made holy by proximity to the divine. Across from the table stands the golden lampstand, perhaps the most technically complex item in the entire tabernacle. Exodus 25:31-40 describes it in detail, but even with careful reading, reconstructing its exact appearance challenges interpreters. The lampstand is hammered from a single talent of pure gold, approximately 34 kilograms or 75 pounds. It includes a central shaft from which 6 branches extend, 3 on each side. Each branch has 3 cups shaped like almond blossoms with buds and flowers. The central shaft has 4 such cups. The lamps themselves sit on top of each branch and on the central shaft, 7 lamps total, and they burn continuously, tended by priests who trim the wicks and refill the oil daily. The lampstand provides light in a windowless space. Without it, the holy place would be completely dark. The priests could not perform their duties, could not see to place the bread on the table or burn incense on the altar. The lampstand makes sacred service possible. But its light does more than illuminate. It represents God himself, who is light and in whom is no darkness at all. The 7-fold lamps will later become a symbol of the Spirit of God in fullness and perfection. The almond blossoms recall Aaron's rod that budded, connecting the lampstand to priestly authority and God's life-giving power. The craftsmanship required to create the lampstand staggers the imagination. Remember, this is not an assembly of parts soldered or welded together. It is a single piece of gold hammered into shape. Bezalel must start with a massive block of gold and gradually transform it. He hammers to form the central shaft, then extends gold outward to create the branches. Each branch must curve gracefully, rising to the same height as the shaft. He shapes the cups, buds and flowers, intricate details that make each branch beautiful. He creates the lamps, ensuring they can hold oil and wicks securely. Every element must be balanced so the lampstand stable despite its height and the weight of oil in the lamps. The work would have required supreme patience. One mistake, one hammer blow that cracks the gold or deforms a branch beyond repair, and Bezalel must melt the entire thing down and start over. The pressure of working with such a large quantity of precious metal, knowing that errors cost time and materials, must be immense. Yet Bezalel perseveres, guided by the vision Moses has shared, empowered by God's Spirit, determined to create something worthy of its purpose. When the lampstand is finally complete and placed in the holy place, its light transforms the space. The gold surfaces throughout the tabernacle reflect and multiply the light, making the interior glow. The embroidered cherubim on the ceiling seem to move in the flickering lamplight. The table of presence, the altar of incense, the veil before the most holy place, all become visible and beautiful. The lampstand's light creates an environment where worship can happen, where priests can serve, where the visible and invisible worlds intersect. Yet the light must be maintained. The lamps do not burn indefinitely on their own. They require pure olive oil, pressed from the finest olives and brought by the Israelites as an offering. They require wicks that must be trimmed daily to prevent smoking. They require priests who attend to them faithfully, morning and evening, ensuring the light never goes out. This teaches that maintaining relationship with God requires ongoing effort. The initial construction of the tabernacle is not enough. Daily faithfulness, consistent service, regular attention, these are what keep the light burning. But between the table and the lampstand, directly in front of the veil that separates the holy place from the most holy place, stands another item whose purpose is to carry Israel's prayers directly to the throne of God. Chapter 12. The altar of sacrifice before any priest enters the holy place. Before anyone approaches the table or the lampstand, they must first pass the altar of burnt offering. This altar stands in the courtyard, immediately visible to anyone who enters the tabernacle complex. It is the first stop for worshippers, the place where sacrifice happens, where blood is shed, where sin is addressed. Without the altar, nothing else in the tabernacle functions. It is the foundation of Israel's entire worship system. The altar measures 5 cubits square and 3 cubits high, roughly 7.5 feet by 7.5 feet by 4.5 feet. Unlike most tabernacle furniture, which is made of wood overlaid with gold, the altar is wood overlaid with bronze. This is practical. Bronze can withstand the intense heat of continuous fire in ways that gold cannot. The altar includes horns at each corner, projecting upward, symbolizing power and authority. A grating of bronze mesh sits inside the altar, allowing ashes to fall through while supporting the wood that fuels the fire. Poles covered with bronze allow the altar to be carried when the camp moves. But here is what many people miss. The altar is hollow. Exodus 27,080 specifies that it should be made with boards, hollow. This seems like a design flaw. How can a hollow structure contain fire and burning sacrifices? The answer likely involves filling the hollow space with earth or stones each time the altar is set up, creating a proper surface for the fire while maintaining the altar's portability. This transforms the altar from a fixed structure into something that can travel with the people, adaptable to different locations while maintaining its essential function. The fire on this altar burns continuously. Leviticus 6:13 commands that fire must be kept burning on the altar continuously. It must not go out. This means someone must tend the altar at all times, adding wood, arranging sacrifices, removing ashes when they accumulate too much. The constancy of the fire teaches that the need for atonement never stops. Every day brings new sins, new failures, new occasions where Israel falls short of God's standards. Every day requires fresh sacrifice, renewed acknowledgement that approaching a holy God costs something. Think about what happens at this altar. Animals are brought, inspected to ensure they are without defect, then slaughtered. The priests collect the blood and splash it against the sides of the altar. They cut the animal into pieces, wash the internal organs, and arrange everything on the wood. As the fire consumes the sacrifice, smoke rises, described in Scripture as a pleasing aroma to the Lord. The smell would have been overwhelming, not pleasant in the modern sense, but significant. It signaled that worship was happening, that the community was maintaining its relationship with God, that sin was being addressed according to divine instructions. But sacrifice is costly. A bull, a ram, even a dove represents wealth to an agricultural society. When a family brings an animal to be sacrificed, they are giving up food, capital, security. They are saying that right relationship with God matters more than economic advantage. They are acknowledging that sin has real consequences that require real payment. The altar teaches that grace is not cheap. Forgiveness costs. Someone or something must die so that the sinner can live. The bronze laver sits between the altar and the entrance to the holy place. This basin, made from the bronze mirrors donated by women, contains water for ritual washing. Priests must wash their hands and feet before entering the tabernacle or approaching the altar to minister. The washing is not optional. Exodus 30:20-21 warns that failure to wash results in death. This is not about physical cleanliness. This is about ritual purity, about acknowledging that even those who serve God must be repeatedly cleansed. The laver teaches that proximity to holiness requires preparation, that approaching God casually or carelessly invites disaster. Inside the holy place, directly before the veil that shields the most holy place, stands the altar of incense. This altar is much smaller than the bronze altar outside, 1 cubit square and 2 cubits high, roughly 1.5 feet square and 3 feet tall. It is made of acacia wood overlaid with gold, with a gold molding and gold horns at each corner. Every morning and evening, when the high priest tends the lamps of the golden lampstand, he also burns incense on this altar. The smoke rises and drifts toward the veil, symbolically carrying Israel's prayers into God's presence. The incense itself is made according to a specific formula that God provides. It includes stacte, onycha, galbanum, and pure frankincense, mixed in prescribed proportions. This incense is holy, set apart exclusively for tabernacle use. Anyone who makes similar incense for personal enjoyment is to be cut off from the people. The smell would have been distinctive, immediately recognizable to anyone who had experienced worship in the tabernacle. Smell is powerfully connected to memory, and the scent of this incense would trigger associations with prayer, with God's presence, with the sacred moments when heaven and earth meet. Once a year, on the Day of Atonement, the high priest applies blood to the horns of this altar, purifying it from the sins of the people. This reinforces that everything in the tabernacle, even the tools used for worship, becomes contaminated by human sin and requires cleansing. Nothing remains clean in a world marked by rebellion and brokenness. Even the altar where prayers ascend to God needs the covering of blood to function as intended. But the altars and furniture would mean little without the priests who serve there, and the priests cannot approach God without specific garments that mark them as holy, set apart for divine service. Chapter 13, Garments of Glory and Beauty, Exodus 28:2 introduces the priestly garments with striking language. You shall make holy garments for Aaron your brother, for glory and for beauty. These are not merely clothes, they are not uniforms chosen for convenience. They are designed to convey glory and beauty, to reflect something of God's character, to transform ordinary men into living representations of divine holiness. Every thread, every color, every ornament communicates meaning. The priests wear theology on their bodies. The high priest's wardrobe is especially elaborate. The innermost layer consists of fine linen undergarments that cover from the waist to the thighs, ensuring modesty. Over these goes a woven tunic of fine linen, full length and likely embroidered or patterned. A sash wraps around the waist, made of fine twisted linen and blue, purple and scarlet yarn, worked with a weaver's skill. On the head sits a turban of fine linen, wound in elaborate folds. These items constitute the basic priestly attire, what all priests wear, but the high priest wears additional layers that set him apart. Over the linen tunic goes the robe of the ephod, made entirely of blue yarn. This sleeveless garment extends below the knees and features a unique hem treatment. Around the bottom alternates pomegranates and golden bells. The pomegranates are made of blue, purple, and scarlet yarn, embroidered or woven into three-dimensional shapes. Between them hang small bells of pure gold, attached so they ring when the high priest walks. Exodus 28:35 explains the purpose. The sound will be heard when he goes into the holy place before the Lord and when he comes out, so that he will not die. Think about what this means. The bells are a safety system. When the high priest enters the most holy place on the Day of Atonement, no one can see him. He is alone behind the veil with the Ark of the Covenant, in the immediate presence of God's glory. If something goes wrong, if he is struck dead for some violation of protocol, the people outside need to know. The bells indicate he is still moving, still alive, still performing his duties. If the bells stop ringing, it signals disaster. Some traditions claim a rope was tied around the high priest's ankle so his body could be dragged out if necessary, though this is not mentioned in scripture. What is clear is that entering God's presence is dangerous, and the bells acknowledge this terrifying reality. The ephod itself is one of the most mysterious garments. It consists of two pieces, front and back. joined at the shoulders with gold settings and onyx stones. Each onyx stone has 6 tribal names engraved on it, so all 12 tribes are represented on the high priest's shoulders. The ephod is made of gold, blue, purple, and scarlet yarn and fine twisted linen, worked with gold thread into elaborate patterns. It fits closely to the body and is secured with a skillfully woven waistband made of the same materials. The exact construction is debated, but the result is a garment that combines the richest materials and finest craftsmanship to create something stunning. On the shoulders of the high priest rests the weight of the nation. The engraved stones make this literal and symbolic simultaneously. He bears the names of the tribes when he enters God's presence. He represents them, intercedes for them, stands between them and the holiness that could consume them. His service is not for himself, but for the people who cannot approach God directly. He is mediator, bridge, the one who makes it possible for a holy God and sinful people to maintain relationship. But the most elaborate piece of the high priest's attire is yet to come, a breastplate that combines artistry, theology, and mystery in ways that continue to fascinate scholars and believers alike.